What happens when the message that saves your life arrives at the exact moment you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life? When love blinds you so completely that it takes a stranger's warning to open your eyes. My name is Helena, I'm 60 years old, and I was about to board a plane to Lisbon with the man I thought I loved. The message I received at the boarding gate didn't just save my money, it saved my life. Welcome to What No One Told Her, where we share the stories that reveal how sometimes the most important warnings come from the most unexpected places. If this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about romance scams. It's about how trust can become a weapon against us, how age can make us vulnerable in ways we never expected, and how sometimes the people trying to protect us are the ones we least expect. That message changed everything. And if you've ever wondered whether love at 60 is possible, or if you've ever felt like something was too good to be true, this story will show you exactly why trusting your instincts, and listening to warnings, can be the difference between a new beginning and complete destruction. Capítulo 1. O Embarque Perfeito. The departure lounge at São Paulo's International Airport buzzed with the familiar energy of travelers beginning new journeys, but for me, this wasn't just another trip. This was the first day of what I had convinced myself would be the rest of my life. At 60 years old, after 30 years of building my consulting business from nothing into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, I was finally ready to live for love instead of just for success. Raphael sat beside me in the premium waiting area, his hand resting gently on my back in that protective way that had made me feel cherished for the past 8 months. At 35, he possessed an easy confidence that complemented my hard-earned success. His Portuguese accent made even mundane conversations sound like poetry, and his attention to my needs had been so consistent, so genuine, that it had gradually dissolved the walls I had built around my heart after my divorce 15 years earlier. "Nervous?" he asked, his dark eyes studying my face with the same intense focus that had first captured my attention during our video calls. "You seem tense, amor." I smiled and squeezed his hand, admiring the simple gold watch I had bought him last month, the same watch he had mentioned admiring in a shop window during one of our walks through São Paulo's upscale neighborhoods. "Just excited," I lied, though there was truth in it too. I was excited. Terrified and excited and completely convinced that I was making the right decision. The plan was perfect in its simplicity. Raphael had been living in Lisbon for 2 years, establishing what he called his consulting practice, while I wrapped up my business affairs in Brazil. His temporary visa was about to expire, and rather than endure the bureaucratic nightmare of renewal, we had decided that I would relocate to Portugal. My business could be managed remotely, my investments were diversified internationally, and Portugal offered tax advantages that made the move financially sensible. More importantly, it offered us the chance to build something together without the scrutiny of my friends and family, most of whom had made their disapproval of our relationship painfully clear. The comments had been subtle but constant. Questions about his work, observations about our age difference, suggestions that I was being impulsive in ways that seemed uncharacteristic for someone known for calculated business decisions. I had dismissed their concerns as jealousy or narrow-mindedness. After decades of putting career before everything else, I had finally found someone who made me want to prioritize love. Raphael never made me feel old or desperate or foolish for wanting romance at my age. Instead, he made me feel beautiful, desired, and worthy of the kind of passion I had thought was reserved for younger women. The boarding announcement crackled through the speakers in Portuguese and English, and I felt that familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with anxiety that comes with major life changes. Raphael stood and gathered our carry-on bags. Ever the gentleman, always thinking of my comfort before his own. It was one of the many small gestures that had convinced me of his genuine care. "Ready to start our new life, minha querida?" he asked, using the endearment that never failed to make me smile. I was reaching for my purse when my phone vibrated with an incoming text message. The timing seemed odd. Most people knew I was traveling today and wouldn't expect immediate responses. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see a final good luck message from one of my business associates or perhaps a flight update from the airline. Instead, I saw a message from an unknown number that made my blood run cold. "Ene with tilde embarque. Saia agora e neo diga nada aele. Don't board. Leave now and don't tell him anything." My hands began to tremble as I stared at the words on my screen. Raphael was standing just a few feet away, organizing our boarding passes and checking his own phone, completely unaware of the message I had just received. The departure lounge continued its normal rhythm around us, families saying goodbye, business travelers checking emails, couples like us preparing for their journeys. But suddenly, everything felt different. The message was in Portuguese, which meant it was from someone who knew my language preferences. The tone was urgent but not hysterical, suggesting someone who was trying to help rather than cause harm. Most disturbing of all, the sender specifically warned me not to tell Raphael about the message, which implied that he was somehow connected to whatever danger I was supposedly facing. Helena. Raphael's voice seemed to come from far away, though he was standing right beside me. Is everything all right? You look pale. I forced myself to look up at him, studying his face for signs of deception or malice that I might have missed during 8 months of what I had believed was genuine courtship. His expression showed only concern and affection, the same emotions I had seen countless times during our dinners, our walks, our quiet evenings planning our future together. Just a work message, I managed to say, proud that my voice sounded relatively normal despite the chaos in my mind. Someone needs a quick response before we board. Raphael nodded understandingly. He had always been patient with my business obligations, never making me feel guilty for the time I devoted to work or the calls I needed to take at inconvenient moments. It was another point in his favor, another reason I had trusted him with my heart and, increasingly, with access to my financial resources. Take your time, he said gently. I'll let them know we need a few extra minutes. As he walked toward the boarding gate to speak with the airline staff, I stared at my phone screen, reading the message again and again. Who could have sent this? Why now, at the exact moment when I was about to board a plane that would take me away from everything familiar and safe? And most importantly, what did the sender know about Raphael that I apparently didn't know myself? The boarding process continued around me, but I remained frozen in my seat, caught between the life I had planned and a warning I couldn't understand but somehow couldn't ignore. Capitulo 2. Oh, romance improvable. To understand why that message shattered my world so completely, you need to understand how Raphael had become the center of it in the first place. Our story began 8 months earlier, in the most mundane way possible, through a professional networking platform where I had been expanding my international business connections. His initial message was refreshingly direct without being aggressive. He introduced himself as a Brazilian expatriate living in Lisbon, working in international business consulting with a focus on helping Brazilian companies establish European operations. His profile showed an accomplished professional with an MBA from a respected Portuguese university, experience with multinational corporations, and a warm smile that suggested both competence and approachability. What caught my attention wasn't his appearance, though he was undeniably attractive, but his understanding of the challenges facing Brazilian businesses in international markets. His first message referenced specific regulatory changes that were affecting my industry, demonstrating knowledge that went far beyond casual research. When I responded with my own insights, our conversation evolved naturally from professional networking to personal connection. The transition happened gradually over several weeks of exchanged messages. Raphael shared stories about his childhood in Salvador, his struggles to establish himself professionally in Europe, and his deep nostalgia for Brazilian culture and food. I found myself looking forward to his messages, which arrived with reliable frequency and always contained thoughtful questions about my work, my interests, and eventually, my personal life. When he suggested our first video call, I hesitated. At 60, I was conscious of competing with younger women in ways that hadn't concerned me in decades. But Raphael's reaction to seeing me was so genuinely appreciative, so focused on my intelligence and accomplishments rather than just my appearance, that my insecurities began to fade. Our conversations revealed a man who seemed to understand the unique challenges of being successful and single at our respective ages. He spoke eloquently about the loneliness of expatriate life, the difficulty of forming meaningful connections when focused on career advancement, and the frustration of being judged by potential partners who couldn't see past surface considerations like age or nationality. People assume I'm looking for a visa or financial support, he told me during one of our late-night calls. They can't believe I might simply be attracted to a woman who has built something meaningful with her life. His words resonated deeply because they reflected my own experiences with dating as a successful, older woman. Younger men were assumed to be fortune hunters, men my age were often intimidated by my achievements, and older men frequently seemed to be looking for caregivers rather than partners. Raphael appeared to be different. He celebrated my success rather than feeling threatened by it. He asked thoughtful questions about my business strategies and offered insights from his European perspective that were genuinely valuable. Most importantly, he seemed to see my age as an asset rather than a liability, praising my experience, my confidence, and what he called my sophisticated understanding of life. The first red flag should have been how quickly he began asking about my travel schedule. Within a month of our initial contact, he was suggesting that we meet in person during one of his business trips to Sao Paulo. When I mentioned that I rarely traveled for pleasure anymore, preferring to focus on work, he offered to arrange his schedule around mine. "I want to meet the woman who built such an impressive empire," he said during one of our video calls. "And I want to show you that not all men are intimidated by successful women." Our first in-person meeting exceeded even my optimistic expectations. Raphael was charming without being overwhelming, attentive without being suffocating, and genuinely interested in learning about my business and my life. He brought thoughtful gifts, not expensive jewelry or flowers, but books by Portuguese authors he thought I would enjoy and specialty foods from Lisbon that he wanted me to try. The physical attraction was undeniable, but what impressed me more was his emotional intelligence. He seemed to understand exactly when to give me space and when to offer support. He listened to my stories about building my business without offering unwanted advice, and he shared his own challenges without expecting me to solve them for him. The second red flag should have been how quickly our relationship progressed from casual dating to serious planning. Within 3 months, Raphael was spending most of his Sao Paulo visits at my apartment. Within 4 months, we were discussing the possibility of a future together. By month 5, he was showing me real estate listings in Lisbon and talking about the business opportunities we could pursue as partners. "You have the capital and the experience," he explained during one of our planning sessions. "I have the European contacts and the local knowledge. Together, we could build something extraordinary." The financial entanglements began innocuously. Raphael's credit card was declined at a restaurant during one of his visits, and he was embarrassed by what he explained as a temporary banking issue related to international transactions. I paid for dinner without thinking much about it. When he offered to reimburse me immediately through a bank transfer, I told him not to worry about such a small amount. Similar incidents began occurring with increasing frequency. A delayed payment from a client left him temporarily short of cash during a week-long visit. An unexpected expense related to his visa renewal required immediate attention. A promising business opportunity demanded a quick deposit that his Portuguese bank couldn't process in time. Each request was reasonable, temporary, and accompanied by detailed explanations and immediate offers of repayment. Raphael never asked for money directly. Instead, he shared his financial challenges, as a trusted partner would, and I offered solutions as a loving girlfriend should. Looking back now, I can see how carefully he had studied my psychology. He understood that direct requests for money would have triggered my business instincts and caused me to become suspicious. Instead, he created scenarios where helping him financially felt like the natural extension of a loving relationship. But at the time, I interpreted every interaction as evidence of his genuine feelings for me. A man who was trying to scam me wouldn't be so transparent about his difficulties, I reasoned. A fortune hunter wouldn't offer such detailed repayment plans or show such obvious embarrassment about temporary financial problems. I was falling in love with someone who seemed too good to be true, but I convinced myself that I simply deserved something good after decades of focusing solely on professional success. Capítulo 3. O Preco do Amor. The financial requests evolved so gradually that I barely noticed how significant they had become until I was reviewing my bank statements for tax preparation in late January. The numbers told a story I hadn't been consciously tracking. Over 6 months, I had loaned Raphael nearly 80,000 reais through a series of transfers, credit card advances, and direct payments that had seemed perfectly reasonable in isolation. The realization should have alarmed me, but Raphael's response when I mentioned the total amount was so immediately reassuring that my concerns evaporated almost as quickly as they had formed. He produced a detailed spreadsheet showing every transaction, complete with dates, amounts, and his planned repayment schedule. More impressive still, he had been tracking interest that he insisted on paying despite my protests that it wasn't necessary between partners. "Helena, I'm horrified that it's gotten to this amount without my realizing it," he said, his obvious distress making me feel guilty for even bringing up the subject. "This is exactly why I keep such careful records. I never want you to feel like I'm taking advantage of your generosity." He showed me bank statements from his Portuguese accounts, explaining how delayed client payments and currency exchange complications had created temporary cash flow problems. His Lisbon apartment, he explained, was in a building that required all residents to contribute to a major renovation project, and his share had been larger than expected. His work visa renewal had involved legal fees that weren't covered by his employer. Every explanation was logical, documented, and temporary. Most convincing of all, Raphael had already begun making partial repayments, transferring small amounts whenever his cash flow allowed. The pattern suggested someone who was genuinely struggling with temporary financial difficulties, rather than someone systematically defrauding me. "I want to pay this back before we move forward with our plans," he said earnestly. "I won't feel right about our partnership if I'm starting it as your debtor." But even as he spoke about repayment, new financial challenges continued to emerge. His consulting business was expanding, which meant new opportunities but also new expenses. A major client had delayed a payment that Raphael had been counting on to clear his debts to me. An investment opportunity had appeared that could solve all his financial problems, but it required immediate capital that he didn't currently have access to. Each situation was presented not as a request for additional money, but as information shared between partners who were planning a future together. Raphael never asked me to solve these problems. Instead, he included me in his decision-making process, seeking my advice as a successful businesswoman and treating me as an equal partner in our emerging relationship. The business opportunity that appeared in February seemed like the solution we had both been hoping for. A Portuguese real estate development company was looking for Brazilian investors to participate in a luxury resort project in the Algarve region. Raphael had been approached because of his connections in both countries, and the developers were offering significant returns to investors who could move quickly. "This could be perfect for us," Raphael explained, showing me professionally prepared investment documents and architectural renderings. "The minimum investment is €50,000, but the projected returns are extraordinary. And once we're living in Portugal, we could oversee the project personally." The opportunity seemed legitimate, even conservative by the standards of international real estate investment. The development company had a track record of successful projects, the location was in a proven tourist market, and the financial projections were realistic rather than wildly optimistic. Most importantly, the investment would be in my name, giving me complete control and ownership. Raphael's role would be purely consultative, using his Portuguese language skills and local knowledge to facilitate communication with the developers and monitor the project's progress. He would receive a small finder's fee for bringing me the opportunity, but the bulk of the returns would be mine. The decision to invest felt natural rather than pressured. Raphael presented the information and answered my questions, but he never pushed for a commitment. Instead, he encouraged me to have the documents reviewed by my own legal and financial advisors, a suggestion that increased my confidence in both the opportunity and his integrity. When my lawyer raised minor concerns about some of the contract language, Raphael immediately contacted the Portuguese developers to request clarifications and modifications. When my accountant suggested additional due diligence steps, Raphael provided contact information for his Portuguese banking contacts who could verify the developer's financial standing. Every concern was addressed professionally and transparently. By March, I had transferred €50,000 to a Portuguese investment account that bore my name and provided me with direct access to all financial records related to the project. The investment marked a turning point in our relationship. For the first time, I felt like we were truly building something together rather than simply dating across international boundaries. Raphael's excitement about our shared financial future was infectious, and his detailed planning for our life in Portugal made the abstract concept of relocation feel concrete and achievable. But the investment also marked the beginning of a new phase in Rafael's financial requests. The success of the real estate project, he explained, had attracted attention from other Portuguese developers who were interested in working with Brazilian investors. The opportunities were larger and more complex, requiring more substantial initial investments but offering correspondingly greater returns. My business instincts should have recognized the classic escalation pattern of financial fraud, but my emotional investment in the relationship had compromised my professional judgment. I was no longer evaluating Rafael's requests as a businesswoman would. I was responding as a woman in love who wanted to support her partner and build a shared future. By the time I received that message at the airport, the total amount of my investments and loans to Rafael had exceeded 250,000 reais. But I wasn't thinking about the money as I stared at my phone in the departure lounge. I was thinking about the man I trusted completely, who was standing just a few meters away, arranging our boarding passes and preparing to take me to what I had believed would be our new life together. The message had shattered that belief in a single sentence, and I didn't know what to do next. Capítulo 4. A mensagem e o medo. The departure lounge's background noise, announcements, conversations, rolling luggage, suddenly seemed amplified and disorienting as I stared at the message on my phone. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain other passengers could hear it, but I forced myself to remain still, to keep my expression neutral while Rafael spoke with the airline staff about our boarding. A second message arrived while I watched him. Se você falar com ele tem pessoas no saguão. Saia pela saída C. Eu explico depois. If you talk to him, he has people in the terminal. Exit through gate C. I'll explain later. The specificity of the instructions made my blood run cold. Whoever was sending these messages had detailed knowledge of the airport layout and Rafael's apparent preparations. The mention of people in the terminal suggested a level of organization that went far beyond a simple romantic deception. Rafael was walking back toward me, his expression showing mild concern but nothing that suggested he was aware of any problems. His smile was the same one that had charmed me for 8 months, warm and genuine and completely convincing. If someone hadn't warned me, I would have noticed nothing unusual about his behavior. All set, amor, he said, settling back into the seat beside me. We'll start boarding in about 10 minutes. First class gets priority, so we won't have to wait in lines with everyone else. The first-class tickets had been his suggestion, another thoughtful gesture that I had interpreted as evidence of his consideration for my comfort. Now I wondered if they served a different purpose, keeping us isolated from other passengers, making it easier to monitor my behavior and responses. I need to use the restroom before we board, I said, proud that my voice sounded steady despite the turmoil in my mind. Of course, Rafael replied. Take your time. I'll watch our bags. As I stood up, I caught him glancing at my phone, which I had been holding throughout our conversation. The look was brief and casual, but it reminded me that he had requested access to my phone several times over the past few months, claiming he wanted to add his Portuguese contacts to my address book or show me photos from his apartment in Lisbon. I had always found reasonable excuses to maintain my privacy, not because I suspected anything sinister but because I had learned over the years to protect my business communications and financial information. Now I wondered if those excuses had prevented him from monitoring my messages and discovering the warnings I was receiving. The walk to the restroom felt surreal, like moving through a dream where everything looked normal but felt fundamentally wrong. I passed families preparing for vacations, business travelers focused on their laptops, couples like Rafael and me who seemed excited about their journeys. None of them appeared to be watching me, but the sender's warning about people in the terminal made me scrutinize every face. Inside the restroom, I locked myself in a stall and read the messages again, looking for clues about the sender's identity. The phone number was clearly a Brazilian mobile, but that didn't narrow down the possibilities significantly. The language was educated Portuguese without regional markers that might indicate the sender's location. A third message arrived as I was analyzing the previous ones. Ene with tilde o volti para ele. Estu vendo você. Camin 8 o balcão de informações de saída C. Don't go back to him. I'm watching you. Walk to the information desk at exit C. The message that someone was watching me should have been terrifying, but instead it felt oddly comforting. Whoever was sending these warnings was clearly in the airport, positioned to observe both Raphael and me, and committed to helping me avoid whatever danger they had identified. But walking to exit C would mean abandoning Raphael without explanation, leaving him to wonder what had happened to me, and potentially triggering whatever backup plans he might have prepared. The sender's warning about people in the terminal suggested that disappearing might not be as simple as walking away. I spent several more minutes in the restroom, trying to develop a strategy that would get me to exit C without alerting Raphael to my intentions. The challenge was that I would have to walk past our departure gate to reach the indicated exit, making it impossible to leave without him seeing me. When I finally emerged from the restroom, Raphael was exactly where I had left him, reading something on his own phone. But as I approached, I noticed details that I might have missed if I hadn't been specifically looking for signs of deception. He was positioned where he could observe both the restroom entrance and the departure gate. His phone was angled so that I couldn't see the screen. His posture was alert in a way that suggested watchfulness rather than relaxation. "Feeling better?" he asked as I sat down beside him. "Much better," I lied, settling back into my seat and trying to appear calm while my mind raced through possibilities. Raphael's phone buzzed with an incoming message, and I watched his face carefully as he read it. His expression didn't change, but he glanced quickly around the departure lounge before typing a response. The behavior was subtle but unmistakable. He was communicating with someone about something that required discretion. "Work?" I asked casually. "A client in Lisbon," he replied without looking up from his phone. "Confirming our meeting for tomorrow." The explanation was smooth and believable, exactly the kind of response I had received to similar questions over the past 8 months. But now I found myself analyzing his words for inconsistencies and evasions rather than accepting them at face value. A final boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. And Raphael stood up again, gathering our carry-on bags with the efficient movements of someone who traveled frequently. Everything about his behavior appeared normal, but I could no longer trust my ability to distinguish between genuine normalcy and skilled performance. "Ready for our new adventure?" he asked, extending his hand to help me up. I took his hand and smiled, still playing the role of the excited girlfriend while my phone remained clutched in my other hand, displaying messages that had transformed my understanding of everything I thought I knew about the man I loved. Capítulo 5. Quem está por trás. The walk toward our boarding gate felt like the longest journey of my life. Every step took me further from the exit C that my mysterious guardian had instructed me to find, but I couldn't see any way to reach it without alerting Raphael to my changed behavior. His hand on my back, once a gesture of loving protection, now felt like supervision. "You seem distracted, Helena," Raphael observed as we joined the first-class boarding line. "Are you worried about leaving your business?" His ability to read my mood, which had once impressed me as evidence of his emotional intelligence, now seemed like the calculated attention of someone who needed to monitor my state of mind for professional reasons. "Just processing everything," I replied, which was truthful enough to sound convincing. My phone vibrated with another message, and I glanced at it as discreetly as possible. "Agora ou nunca. Finja que está passando mal. Va para o balcão de primeros socorros perto da saída C. Now or never. Pretend you're feeling sick. Go to the first aid station near exit C." The instruction was brilliant in its simplicity. Feeling suddenly ill would explain my need to leave the boarding area without suggesting that I suspected anything about Raphael. It would also provide a legitimate reason for me to be alone while seeking medical attention. "Oh," I said, pressing my hand to my forehead and swaying slightly. "I feel very dizzy suddenly." Raphael's response was immediate and appeared genuinely concerned. He dropped our bags and steadied me with both hands, his touch gentle and protective. "What's wrong, amor? Do you need to sit down?" "I think I need some air," I said, allowing my voice to sound weak and uncertain. "Maybe something I ate earlier." "There's a first aid station just down the corridor," Raphael said, pointing in the direction that would take us away from exit C. I'll help you walk there. No, I said quickly, then softened my tone to sound more vulnerable than resistant. I don't want you to lose our place in line. These first-class seats cost too much to risk missing the flight. Raphael hesitated, clearly torn between staying with me and protecting our travel arrangements. In that moment of hesitation, I saw something that confirmed my growing suspicions. A quick glance toward someone in the boarding area, followed by an almost imperceptible nod. I'll be fine, I continued, taking a small step away from him. It's probably just nerves about the move. Give me 10 minutes to get some fresh air and maybe some antacid. I should come with you, Raphael insisted, but his eyes were already calculating the logistics of maintaining our departure schedule. Please don't fuss, I said, managing a weak smile. I've been taking care of myself for 60 years. I can handle a little stomach upset. The comment about my age was calculated to trigger his pattern of reassuring me about my independence and competence, and it worked exactly as I had hoped. Of course you can, he said, squeezing my hand. You're the strongest woman I know. But call me if you need anything, and don't take too long. They won't hold the plane. I walked away from him with careful, measured steps, maintaining the appearance of someone who was unwell but not seriously incapacitated. As I moved through the terminal, I used store windows and reflective surfaces to monitor whether anyone was following me, but I detected no obvious surveillance. The first aid station near Exit C was exactly where the message sender had indicated, staffed by a competent-looking nurse who immediately offered assistance when she saw my apparent distress. I'm feeling much better already, I told her. I think I just needed to walk around a bit. As I spoke with the nurse, my phone vibrated with a new message. Saya pela porta ao lado do balcão. Uma mulher de blazer azul vai encontrar-lhe do lado de fora. Exit through the door next to the counter. A woman in a blue blazer will meet you outside. The door was marked as an emergency exit, but it wasn't alarmed during normal business hours. I waited until the nurse was distracted by another passenger's question, then slipped through the door and found myself in a service corridor that connected to the airport's administrative areas. The woman in the blue blazer was waiting exactly as promised, and I recognized her immediately despite the context being completely unexpected. Marina, I said, unable to hide my surprise. Marina Santos was my relationship manager at Banco do Brasil, a professional woman in her 40s who had been handling my business accounts for over 3 years. Her presence in an airport service corridor, sending anonymous warnings about my boyfriend, was so surreal that I wondered if I was experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Helena, thank God you listened to my messages, Marina said, her usual professional composure replaced by obvious relief and urgency. We need to talk immediately, and we need to do it where he can't find you. Marina, what are you doing here? How did you know about Raphael? How did you know I was traveling today? Because I've been investigating him for the past month, she replied, producing a thick folder from her briefcase. And what I've discovered is going to shock you. She led me to a small office that appeared to be used by airport security personnel, where she spread documents across a desk with the efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this moment. Your account showed a pattern of transactions that triggered our fraud detection algorithms, Marina began. Large transfers to Portuguese accounts, unusual currency exchanges, significant changes in your normal spending patterns. When I started investigating, I discovered that Rafael Silva, if that's even his real name, has been operating similar schemes with at least 6 other Brazilian women over the past 2 years. The documents she showed me were devastating in their comprehensiveness. Bank records showing transfers from other women to the same Portuguese accounts that Rafael had used for our investments. Photographs of Rafael with other women, some of them clearly taken during romantic dinners and intimate moments. Communication records showing that he had been using identical language and promises with multiple targets simultaneously. The real estate investment you made in March? Marina continued. The development company doesn't exist. The bank account you transferred money to is controlled by a network of individuals who specialize in romance fraud targeting successful older women. But I spoke with the developers, I protested weakly. I had my lawyer review the contracts. You spoke with members of his team who were playing assigned roles, Marina explained. The contracts were sophisticated forgeries. Your lawyer couldn't detect the fraud because the documents were professionally created to pass initial legal review. The evidence was overwhelming, but what made it undeniable was Marina's revelation about how she had discovered my situation. I've been working with federal police on a task force targeting international romance fraud, she said. Your case was one of several we've been investigating, and we identified today's flight as a critical intervention point. What would have happened if I had boarded the plane? Marina's expression grew even more serious. Based on the other cases we've documented, you would have been taken to a location in Portugal where you would have been pressured to sign additional financial documents and transfer control of more assets. The women who resist are abandoned in foreign countries with no resources. The women who comply are systematically drained of everything they own. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, but what shocked me most was the realization that I had been saved not by luck or intuition, but by the vigilance of professionals who were specifically watching for predators like Rafael. Capítulo 6. O Teatro no Vidro do Aeroporto. From the security office window, I could see the departure gate where Rafael was waiting for my return. Even at a distance, his body language told a story of increasing concern and confusion. He was pacing in the small area around our boarding gate, checking his phone frequently, and scanning the terminal for signs of my return. He's been calling you, Marina observed, pointing to my phone, which had been buzzing with ignored calls for the past 15 minutes. And he's been texting someone else quite frequently. I looked at my phone and saw 7 missed calls from Rafael, along with a series of text messages that progressed from concern to alarm. Helena, where are you? The nurse said you left the first aid station. Amor, I'm getting worried. Please call me. The gate agent says they need to close boarding soon. Where are you? Helena, this isn't funny. Call me immediately. The evolution of his messages from loving concern to demanding control would have been subtle enough to miss under normal circumstances, but viewing them through the lens of Marina's revelations made the manipulation tactics obvious. Watch his behavior, Marina instructed, handing me a pair of small binoculars that the security office apparently kept for surveillance purposes. Notice how he's positioned himself and who he's communicating with. Through the binoculars, I could see details that had been invisible from our previous distance. Rafael wasn't just pacing randomly, he was moving in a pattern that allowed him to observe multiple terminal entrances while maintaining visual contact with our boarding gate. His phone conversations weren't casual, they involved specific gestures and what appeared to be coordinated instructions. Most telling of all, I could see 2 other individuals who were clearly working with him. A woman reading a magazine near the departure gate kept glancing in Rafael's direction and responding to hand signals. A man at a coffee shop was positioned where he could monitor the terminal's main security checkpoint and appeared to be tracking passenger movements. How many people are involved in this operation? I asked Marina. From what we've been able to determine, Rafael's organization includes at least 12 individuals operating across 3 countries, she replied. They have established identities, backup documentation, and contingency plans for situations exactly like this one. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. This wasn't a single man taking advantage of lonely women, it was a sophisticated criminal enterprise with the resources and organization of a small business. What happens now? I asked, watching Rafael become increasingly agitated as boarding time approached. Now we document everything, Marina said, producing a tablet that she positioned to record Rafael's behavior. His reaction to your disappearance will provide evidence for the criminal investigation, and it will help us understand their operational procedures. As we watched, Rafael made a phone call that appeared to trigger immediate action from his associates. The woman with the magazine stood up and began walking through the terminal, clearly searching for me. The man at the coffee shop moved to a position near the first aid station where I had last been seen. They're conducting a coordinated search, Marina observed. This level of organization confirms that we're dealing with professionals, not amateur opportunists. My phone rang again, and Marina nodded for me to answer it. Helena, Where the hell are you? Raphael's voice was sharp with anger that he wasn't bothering to disguise anymore. Do you have any idea how much these tickets cost? The plane is about to leave without us. I'm still feeling sick, I said, trying to maintain the pretense of illness while Marina recorded the conversation. I think I might have food poisoning. Maybe I should go home and see a doctor. Absolutely not, Raphael replied immediately. We can get you medical attention in Lisbon. Portuguese doctors are excellent, and I have connections at the best hospitals. The speed and firmness of his rejection confirmed Marina's warnings about what would have happened if I had boarded the plane. He wasn't concerned about my health, he was concerned about maintaining control over the situation. But what if I'm too sick to travel? I persisted. Helena, listen to me very carefully, Raphael said, his voice taking on a tone I had never heard before, cold, authoritative, and vaguely threatening. We have invested too much in this plan for you to get cold feet now. You will get on this plane, and we will deal with your health issues once we reach Portugal. The mask had slipped completely. The loving, supportive boyfriend had been replaced by someone giving orders and making demands. Marina gestured for me to continue the conversation while she made notes about his responses. I'm scared, Raphael, I said truthfully. Something doesn't feel right. What doesn't feel right is you creating drama at the last minute, he replied. This is exactly the kind of emotional instability that your friends warned me about. I've been patient with your age-related anxiety, but this is ridiculous. The reference to my age as a source of instability was clearly designed to undermine my confidence and make me question my own judgment. Combined with the suggestion that my friends had discussed my supposed emotional problems with him, it was a masterful piece of psychological manipulation. But it was also a mistake that revealed how carefully he had been studying and documenting my vulnerabilities for use in exactly this type of situation. I'm coming to find you, Raphael continued. Stay where you are and don't talk to anyone. He ended the call before I could respond, and Marina immediately began making calls of her own. Airport security needs to intervene before he locates this office, she said. And we need to get you to a secure location where you can provide a detailed statement about your relationship with him. Through the window, I could see Raphael talking urgently with his associates, pointing in different directions and issuing what appeared to be specific instructions. The search for me was becoming more systematic and aggressive. Marina, I said, still struggling to process the complete reversal of everything I had believed about Raphael, how many women has he done this to? That we know of. At least 15 over the past 3 years, she replied. But we suspect the actual number is much higher. The realization that I was just one of many victims should have been humiliating, but instead it was oddly comforting. My mistake hadn't been unique or particularly foolish. I had been targeted by professionals who specialized in exploiting the vulnerabilities of successful, independent women who were open to love later in life. Capítulo 7. O Contraataque Silencioso. The next hour unfolded like a carefully choreographed operation. Marina had clearly been preparing for this intervention for weeks, and every step of the process demonstrated the kind of professional competence that I recognized from my own business experience. The first priority is protecting your financial assets, Marina explained as she guided me through a secure terminal area that I hadn't known existed. We need to freeze all accounts that Raphael has had access to, cancel any credit cards he might have information about, and reverse any recent transactions that can be legally challenged. While airport security monitored Raphael's increasingly frantic search for me, Marina and I worked through a comprehensive financial protection checklist. Every account number, every password, every financial instrument that Raphael had ever seen or heard about was immediately secured through a series of phone calls to banks, investment firms, and credit card companies. The process revealed the full extent of how thoroughly I had been compromised. Raphael had accumulated access to far more of my financial information than I had consciously provided. During our months together, he had observed me entering passwords, had seen account statements lying on my desk, and had carefully noted details about my business operations that could be used to impersonate me or gain unauthorized access to my accounts. This is why romance fraud is so devastating for victims, Marina explained as we worked. The criminals don't just steal money, they steal intimate knowledge about your entire financial life. They learn your habits, your preferences, your security questions, and your vulnerabilities. The most shocking discovery was that Raphael had already attempted to access several of my accounts using information he had gathered during our relationship. Marina showed me login attempts that had been blocked by security protocols, failed password attempts using information that Raphael would have known about me, and inquiries to financial institutions using my personal information. He's been preparing for this day for months, Marina said. If you had boarded that plane, he would have had everything he needed to systematically drain your accounts while you were out of the country and unable to respond quickly to suspicious activity. While we secured my financial assets, Marina's colleagues were documenting Raphael's behavior in the terminal. The recordings they were making would provide evidence for criminal charges, but they also revealed the sophisticated nature of his operation. Look at this, Marina said, showing me surveillance footage on her tablet. When he realized you weren't coming back, he immediately began executing a contingency plan. The footage showed Raphael and his associates moving through the terminal with obvious coordination. One person was collecting their luggage, another was speaking with airline personnel, and a third was conducting what appeared to be a methodical search of the terminal's service areas. They're not just looking for you, Marina observed. They're trying to determine if their operation has been compromised by law enforcement. As we watched, Raphael made a series of phone calls that resulted in immediate changes to his team's behavior. Within minutes, all 3 visible associates had left the terminal, abandoning their search and disappearing into the airport's crowd. He's cutting his losses, Marina said. Professional criminals know when to retreat and regroup rather than risk exposure. But Raphael himself remained in the terminal, continuing his search with what appeared to be desperation rather than strategic thinking. His phone calls became more agitated, his movements more erratic, and his interaction with airport personnel more demanding. He's not acting rationally anymore, I observed. That's because you represented a significant investment of time and resources, Marina explained. Based on our analysis of similar cases, he's been working on your case for almost a year, including several months of preparation before he ever contacted you. The idea that my entire relationship with Raphael had been preceded by months of research and planning was deeply disturbing. Every shared interest, every moment of apparent compatibility, every gesture that had seemed spontaneous had actually been the result of careful study and strategic calculation. My phone buzzed with a new message from Raphael. Helena, I know you're reading this. Whatever someone has told you about me, it's not true. I love you, and everything we've planned together is real. Don't let jealous people destroy what we have. The message was followed immediately by another. I'm not leaving this airport without you. If you don't come back to me voluntarily, I'll find you myself. Marina read the messages over my shoulder and immediately contacted airport security. He's escalating to threats, she said. That changes our legal options significantly. Within minutes, I could see through the office window that airport security officers were approaching Raphael at the departure gate. His reaction to their presence was telling. He immediately became cooperative and charming, using the same techniques that had worked so effectively on me during our 8-month relationship. But his charm had no effect on security professionals who had been briefed about his criminal activities. After a brief conversation, Raphael was escorted to a private area where, Marina informed me, he would be questioned about his activities and potentially detained depending on what the investigation revealed. What happens to me now? I asked. Now you go home and rebuild your financial security, Marina replied. And you help us build a criminal case that will prevent Raphael from victimizing other women. The statement-taking process was exhaustive but therapeutic. For 3 hours, I provided detailed information about every aspect of my relationship with Raphael, from our first online contact to the messages he had sent just hours earlier. Each revelation added to a picture of systematic deception that was both personally devastating and legally compelling. Your case is particularly valuable because you documented so much, Marina explained. The investment contracts, the bank transfers, the emails and text messages, all of that becomes evidence that can be used to prosecute not just Raphael but his entire organization. As the day ended, I learned that Raphael had been detained by airport authorities and would be held pending investigation by federal police specializing in international fraud. His associates had been identified through surveillance footage and would be subject to their own investigations. But the most important outcome was that I was safe, my assets were protected, and I had escaped what would have been a devastating financial and personal catastrophe. Capítulo 8, Verdades e Feridas. 3 days after the airport incident, I sat in a sterile conference room at the federal police headquarters in São Paulo, facing Raphael across a table for what I knew would be the last time. He was no longer the charming, solicitous boyfriend I had known for 8 months. The man sitting across from me was a stranger wearing Raphael's face, speaking with Raphael's voice, but radiating a cold calculation that made my skin crawl. The confrontation had been arranged by the prosecutors handling his case, who believed that a recorded conversation between us might produce admissions that would strengthen their criminal charges. I had agreed to participate not because I wanted to see him again, but because I needed to understand who he really was and what our relationship had actually meant to him. "Helena," he said as soon as I entered the room, his voice carrying the same warm tone that had once made me feel cherished. "Thank God you're here. I've been so worried about you since the airport. Are you all right?" The immediate shift to concern and affection was so seamless that I might have believed it was genuine if I hadn't spent the past 3 days learning about his extensive criminal history. According to the federal police investigation, Rafael Silva was actually Roberto Santos, a 38-year-old Brazilian who had been operating romance fraud schemes across South America and Europe for over 5 years. "I'm fine, Roberto," I said, using his real name deliberately to let him know that his deceptions had been completely exposed. His reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a brief tightening around his eyes, followed by a smile that didn't quite reach them. "I don't know what lies people have been telling you," he said, maintaining his concerned tone, "but nothing has changed between us. I love you, Helena. Everything we planned together is still possible. Even though your name isn't Rafael Silva?" "Names are just paperwork," he replied smoothly. "The person you fell in love with is real. My feelings for you are real. The life we planned in Portugal is real." The ease with which he lied, even when confronted with irrefutable evidence of his deception, was both impressive and terrifying. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a master manipulator who could maintain his performance even under the most challenging circumstances. Detective Carla Mendoza, who was leading the investigation, had prepared me for this. "Sophisticated romance fraudsters are essentially actors," she had explained. "They develop characters and maintain those characters even when their lies are exposed. The performance becomes so natural that they may not even recognize the distinction between their authentic selves and their criminal personas." "Roberto," I said, allowing some of the pain I felt to show in my voice, "I've seen the evidence. I know about the other women. I know about the fake investments and the forged documents. I know this was all a lie from the beginning." For the first time, his composure cracked slightly. The mask of loving concern slipped, revealing something harder and more calculating underneath. "What do you want me to say, Helena? That I targeted you because you're wealthy and successful? That I studied your business profile and your personal vulnerabilities before I ever contacted you? That everything I told you about myself was carefully crafted to appeal to your psychological needs?" The admission was delivered with a tone of defiant honesty, as if he was challenging me to judge him for his professionalism. "Is that what you're saying?" "I'm saying that what we had was more complicated than a simple fraud scheme," he replied. "Yes, I targeted you initially for financial reasons. Yes, I created a persona that I knew would appeal to you. But somewhere along the way, it became more than just a job." The claim that Capítulo 8, Verdades e Feridas. The claim that his feelings had become genuine was perhaps the most manipulative statement he could have made. Detective Mendoza had warned me that sophisticated fraudsters often use partial admissions of guilt combined with claims of authentic emotion as a way to maintain psychological control over their victims even after their crimes are exposed. "So you're saying that you started lying to me but ended up caring about me?" I asked, allowing disbelief to color my voice. I'm saying that what began as a professional assignment became personal, he replied. Yes, I researched you before our first contact. Yes, I created a persona designed to appeal to your specific psychological profile. But spending 8 months talking with you, learning about your life, understanding your dreams and fears, that changed me. The sophistication of his manipulation was breathtaking. Even while admitting to systematic deception, he was trying to reframe our relationship as something that had transcended its criminal origins. He was positioning himself not as a predator who had targeted me, but as someone who had been transformed by genuine connection. Roberto, I said, using his real name again to anchor the conversation in reality rather than his fabricated identity, I've seen the evidence of your other relationships. You used identical language with at least 6 other women. You made the same promises, shared the same stories, created the same investment opportunities. Those were different, he insisted. Those women were just targets. What you and I had was real. Detective Mendoza had prepared me for this exact argument. According to her research, romance fraudsters frequently claim that their current victim is somehow special or different from their previous targets. It's a psychological technique designed to make victims feel chosen and valued, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that they were simply part of a pattern. Show me how it was different, I challenged. Show me one way that your relationship with me was unique. For the first time since the conversation began, Roberto seemed genuinely unsettled. He looked down at his hands, then back at me, and I could see him calculating his response. You have to understand the psychology of what I do, he said finally. Most of my targets are lonely, desperate women who are easy to manipulate because they want so desperately to believe that someone could love them. But you're different. You're successful, confident, independent. You didn't need me financially or emotionally. That made the challenge more interesting. The admission was devastating in its casual cruelty. He was describing me not as someone he had grown to care about, but as a more challenging target who had provided greater professional satisfaction. My strength and independence, the very qualities I was most proud of, had simply made me a more appealing victim for his manipulations. So my success made me a better target? I asked. Your success made the work more rewarding, he replied with a frankness that was more chilling than any lie could have been. Anyone can steal from a desperate widow or a lonely divorcee. But convincing a successful businesswoman to trust me completely, to give me access to her finances, to relocate to another country for me, that required skill. The recording equipment that Detective Mendoza had installed in the room was capturing every word of his confession, but I found myself wishing I could unhear his explanations. It would have been easier to think of him as a simple criminal motivated by greed than to understand that I had been selected as a particularly challenging professional project. The other women, I pressed. What happened to them? Roberto's expression became guarded again. That's not relevant to our situation. It's relevant to me understanding who you really are. He studied my face for a long moment, then shrugged with apparent indifference. Maria Santos lost her retirement savings and her house. She's living with her sister in Recife. Ana Oliveira borrowed against her business to give me money and ended up bankrupt. She had to close her restaurant. Carmen Rodriguez sold her family's property in Spain and gave me the proceeds. She's working as a cleaning lady in Madrid now. The casual recitation of lives he had destroyed was delivered without emotion or apparent remorse. These weren't abstract victims to him. They were specific individuals whose devastation he could describe in detail. And he was sharing their fates with me not as a confession of guilt, but as evidence of his professional competence. And you feel nothing about what you did to them? I feel proud of the work, he said simply. Each case required different strategies, different personas, different psychological approaches. Carmen thought she was in love with a struggling artist who needed money to mount an exhibition. Ana thought she was supporting an entrepreneur who was launching a tech startup. Maria believed she was helping a missionary who was building schools in Africa. The revelation that he had used completely different identities and stories with each victim was simultaneously impressive and horrifying. He wasn't just a man who lied to women for money, he was a professional chameleon who could become whoever his targets needed him to be. "What was I to you, Roberto? What character were you playing for me?" "You were the successful older woman who was afraid of being alone," he replied without hesitation. "You needed someone who could match your intelligence and appreciate your achievements without being intimidated by them. You wanted a partner, not a dependent. So I became Rafael Silva, the expatriate consultant who understood your world and could contribute to your success rather than just benefit from it." The psychological profile he had developed of me was uncomfortably accurate. Every aspect of the Rafael persona had been crafted to appeal to specific vulnerabilities and desires that I hadn't even fully acknowledged to myself. "How long did you study me before making contact?" 3 months of research, he said. "Your business profile, your social media activity, your public interviews, your divorce records, your property purchases. I knew more about your psychology than most people learn about their spouses in years of marriage." The scope of his preparation was staggering. While I had thought we were getting to know each other through months of conversation, he had already been an expert on my life, my personality, and my weaknesses long before our first exchange of messages. "The hardest part wasn't learning about you," Roberto continued. "It was maintaining the performance for 8 months. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to be someone else consistently for that long? Every conversation had to be perfect. Every response had to reinforce the character. Every emotion had to be calculated to produce the desired effect." He was complaining about the difficulty of deceiving me, as if I should sympathize with the professional challenges he had faced while systematically destroying my life. Capítulo 9. OK Fica de Pay. 6 months have passed since that confrontation in the police station, and I'm writing this from my home office in Sao Paulo, the same space where I used to take Rafael's calls and plan our future together. The view from my window hasn't changed, but everything else in my world has been transformed by the experience of nearly losing everything to someone I trusted completely. Roberto was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. His organization, which the investigation revealed had been operating across 7 countries, was dismantled through coordinated international law enforcement efforts. The case became a landmark prosecution that led to new legislation strengthening penalties for romance fraud and requiring banks to implement additional protections for vulnerable customers. But the legal victory, satisfying as it was, could not undo the deeper damage that his deception had caused. The trust one had extended to him hadn't just been financial, it had been emotional, psychological, and spiritual. He had studied me like a specimen, identified my vulnerabilities with scientific precision, and exploited my deepest desires for connection and partnership. The recovery process has been more complex than simply rebuilding my financial security. I recovered most of the money through asset seizures and victim restitution programs, but the psychological healing has required professional therapy and a fundamental reconstruction of how I approach relationships and trust. My therapist, Dr. Amanda Santos, explained that victims of sophisticated romance fraud often experience a form of psychological trauma that resembles the aftermath of emotional abuse. "You weren't just deceived about his identity," she told me during one of our sessions. "You were deceived about your own judgment, your ability to read people, your understanding of what love feels like. That kind of betrayal requires time to process and heal." The most challenging aspect of recovery has been learning to trust my own instincts again. 4 months after the airport incident, I found myself second-guessing every interaction, analyzing every conversation for signs of deception, wondering if other people in my life were also performing roles designed to manipulate me. But gradually, with professional help and the support of genuine friends who had tried to warn me about Rafael, I began to rebuild not just my confidence but my understanding of how healthy relationships actually function. The red flags had been there from the beginning, but I had misinterpreted them as signs of romantic intensity rather than professional manipulation. The quick progression of our relationship, his immediate declarations of love, his detailed interest in my finances, his careful avoidance of video calls early in our relationship, his tendency to share personal crises that required financial solutions, All of these were textbook warning signs that I had ignored because I wanted to believe that someone could love me the way Raphael appeared to. If you've ever wondered whether you could be vulnerable to this kind of deception, if you've ever met someone online who seems too good to be true, I want you to share this story. Not because you should never trust anyone, but because you should trust carefully, verify independently, and never ignore the voice in your head that says something doesn't feel right. The work I've done with law enforcement has become an unexpected source of meaning in the aftermath of my experience. I now consult with federal investigators on romance fraud cases, helping them understand the victim's perspective and identify the psychological techniques that make these crimes so effective. Through this work, I've met other survivors who shared similar experiences of systematic deception and manipulation. Their stories have helped me understand that Roberto's ability to exploit my trust wasn't a reflection of my weakness or naivety. It was evidence of his professional skill at identifying and targeting successful, independent women who were open to love later in life. These criminals are psychological predators, Detective Mendoza explained during one of our follow-up meetings. They study human behavior the way scientists study lab animals. They understand exactly which emotional triggers will produce the responses they need to achieve their goals. But perhaps the most important lesson I've learned is that the capacity to love and trust, even after being devastated by betrayal, is not a weakness to be overcome but a strength to be protected and nurtured. I'm dating again, though more carefully and with better boundaries than I maintained with Roberto. My current relationship, with a man I met through mutual friends rather than online, who has been thoroughly vetted by people I trust, who has never asked for financial assistance or shared urgent crises requiring my immediate help, is built on the foundation of gradual, mutual discovery rather than intense, immediate connection. Marina, the bank manager who saved me, has become a close friend. Our shared experience of that dramatic day at the airport created a bond that has evolved into genuine affection and respect. She continues to work with law enforcement on financial fraud prevention, and we often collaborate on educational programs designed to help other people recognize and avoid romance scams. Your story has probably saved dozens of other women from similar experiences, she told me recently. Every time you speak at one of these seminars, someone in the audience recognizes behaviors they've been ignoring in their own relationships. The seminars have become a regular part of my life, speaking at banks, community centers, and senior organizations about the realities of romance fraud. The audiences are typically women over 50, and their questions reveal how common the vulnerability to this type of crime has become in our age of online dating and social isolation. How do you know if someone really loves you or is just performing love? Is the question I'm asked most frequently. My answer has become, real love doesn't demand financial proof. Real love doesn't create crises that require immediate solutions. Real love doesn't isolate you from friends and family who express concerns. Real love doesn't progress from first contact to life-changing commitment in a matter of months. But more importantly, I tell them, real love allows you to maintain your independence, your judgment, and your connections to the people who knew you before the relationship began. If someone's love requires you to stop listening to your own instincts or the people who care about you, it's not love, it's control. The message I received at the airport, don't board. Leave now. Don't tell him anything, saved more than my money. It saved my life from a path that would have led to complete financial and emotional devastation in a foreign country where I would have had no resources or support system. Sometimes the most important warnings come from strangers who care about justice more than they care about our feelings. Sometimes the people trying to protect us are the ones we least expect. And sometimes the best decision we can make is to listen when someone tells us to walk away from what looks like love but feels like something else entirely. My name is Helena, I'm 66 years old now, and I survived one of the most sophisticated romance frauds ever prosecuted in Brazil. If this story has taught you anything, let it be this. Trust is precious, love is possible at any age, but both require wisdom, verification, and the courage to listen when someone who cares about you says, don't get on that plane. The most dangerous message is the one that asks you to ignore all the other voices in your life. The most important message might be the one that arrives at the last possible moment, from someone you barely know, who cares enough to warn you that everything you think you know is wrong.